So today I want to talk about something that most people are completely missing about this war. The cameras are on the explosions. The anchors are reading casualty numbers. The politicians are giving emergency press conferences. Social media is flooded with clips of strikes, fires, and debris. And all of it, every single piece of it, is pointing your attention at the wrong thing. The war you are watching on your screen is real, but it is not the real story, not even close. Almost nobody is asking the question that actually matters to ordinary people. Not who fired first, not which general made what mistake. The question that will affect your job, your savings, your energy bills, your food prices, and your future is this. What is this war permanently changing? Because behind every conflict that reshapes the world, there is a set of changes that happen quietly, in balance sheets and boardrooms and back-channel negotiations, while everyone else is watching the explosions. That is what we are here to talk about today. The answer, when you look at the evidence carefully, is that this war is not simply a military event between specific nations. It is the accelerant for the most consequential restructuring of global trade and global energy and global finance in 50 years. Supply chains that billions of people depend on are fracturing. The energy systems that power the modern world are being permanently disrupted. The financial architecture that made the post-war era possible is being quietly dismantled and rebuilt by people who have been preparing for exactly this moment. Depending on where you live, these changes are already arriving. Not in some distant future, right now in the prices you pay every single day. So today I want to walk you through exactly what the real story is. Country by country, layer by layer, winner by winner, and loser by loser. We will start with what everyone is watching and then pull back to reveal the economic war beneath the military one. We will look at China, America, Europe, the Middle East itself, and the part of the world the cameras never reach, where the real human cost of all of this is landing hardest. And we will end with the single most important story of this entire conflict that almost no one in mainstream media is reporting. So let us begin. Here's the single idea that will make everything else I tell you today make sense. Every major conflict of the modern era has had two wars running at the same time. The first war is the one you can see. The weapons, the territory, the leaders, the body counts. The second war is invisible to most people. The economic repositioning, the resource competition, the financial architecture being quietly rebuilt while the armies fight. The first war decides who wins the battle. The second war decides who wins the century. World War II is the clearest example. Most people understand it as a military conflict between Allied and Axis powers. And it was. But underneath that conflict, the United States was simultaneously establishing the dollar as the world's reserve currency, building Bretton Woods, creating the IMF and the World Bank, and designing a post-war order that would make America the dominant economic power for the next 80 years. Britain won the war militarily. America won the century economically because America was fighting both wars at once, and Britain was only fighting one. This conflict is following exactly the same pattern, and the nations that understand this, that see both wars simultaneously, are already making moves that will define the next 50 years. The question is no longer whether this war will reshape the global economy. Every serious analyst already agrees that it will. The question is, which nations understand what game is really being played and which nations are so focused on the first war that they are losing the second one without even realizing it? The answer to that question depends entirely on one thing. How clearly does your country see beyond the screen? The more clearly your leadership understands the second war, the better positioned your nation will be. When this conflict ends, the less clearly they see it, the more they will be left holding consequences they never prepared for. So let me walk you through every major player in this conflict with that framework in mind. First, the surface story, then the real one. On the surface, America looks like the dominant force in this conflict. Its military hardware is unmatched. Its carrier groups are positioned. Its intelligence networks are active across the region. By every conventional military measure, America looks exactly like what it has been for 8 decades, the world's foremost military power. But underneath that surface, America is fighting this conflict while a slow, structural erosion is eating at the very foundations of its global power. And the military campaign is accelerating that. Erosion, not stopping it. The foundation of American global power since 1973 has not been its military. It has been the petrodollar system. Here's how it works. Gulf nations price their oil in US dollars. Every country in the world that needs Gulf energy must hold US dollars to buy it. So that creates permanent, enormous global demand for the dollar. The Gulf then recycles those dollar earnings back into oil. American financial markets continuously buying US debt. This mechanism is what allows America to carry $39 trillion in debt without triggering the kind of financial crisis that would destroy any other nation. The dollar is not strong because America is rich. America appears rich because the dollar is globally indispensable. This war is threatening that mechanism directly. Every sanction America applies, every financial system it weaponizes, every nation it pressures to choose sides, sends the same message to the watching world. The dollar system can be used as a weapon against you. And nations that hear that message are quietly accelerating their efforts to build alternatives. Yuan-denominated oil contracts, gold-backed bilateral agreements, BRICS payment infrastructure. These are not theoretical. They are live and growing in direct response to what they are watching America do. For ordinary American families, this means that the financial architecture keeping their cost of living manageable, cheap imports, low government borrowing costs, dollar-priced energy is under a form of quiet pressure that their leaders are not communicating clearly. Now let us look at the country watching America's moves most carefully. And on the surface, China looks like a cautious bystander. It has not deployed military assets. It is not making dramatic statements. Most news coverage positions China as a background figure, watching, calculating, but not engaged. But underneath that surface, China is running the most sophisticated second war strategy of any actor in this conflict. And it does not need to fire a single shot to advance it. China imports approximately 40% of its total energy from the Gulf. That dependency is a strategic vulnerability that Beijing has been working to eliminate for 20 years. The Belt and Road Initiative, the Eurasian pipeline agreements with Russia, the long-term energy contracts with Iran, all of it serves one strategic imperative: free China from dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. This conflict is giving China the urgency and the justification to accelerate every one of those efforts simultaneously, but the deeper game is financial. Every week, this conflict continues. The legitimacy of the dollar-based financial system takes a small hit. Every new sanction, every asset freeze, every forced choice ultimatum that America issues pushes more nations toward the alternative architecture China has been quietly building for a decade. The BRICS payment network, the cross-border interbank payment system, the Shanghai Gold Exchange. China does not need to displace the dollar today. It simply needs to build a credible alternative and let American foreign policy do the rest of the work. China's risk is miscalculation, a conflict that spirals into a full regional war, a genuine collapse of Gulf energy supply, a global recession deep enough to crater demand for Chinese exports. None of those outcomes serve Beijing's interests. China needs the world disrupted enough to accelerate de-dollarization, but functional enough to keep buying what China produces. It is a precise and delicate balance. For ordinary Chinese families, this conflict is managed as a distant story, but their government is engaged in some of the most consequential strategic maneuvering of its modern history. Now let us look at the power that is gaining the most from every day this conflict continues. On the surface, Russia looks weakened. Sanctions have cut it off from Western financial markets. Its military is tied down in Ukraine. its international reputation in the Western world at least is at its lowest point in decades. Most Western analysis treats Russia as an isolated, diminished actor stumbling toward strategic irrelevance. But underneath that surface, Russia is the single clearest beneficiary of this conflict, and the mechanism is straightforward. Every barrel of Gulf oil that is disrupted by this war is a barrel of Russian oil that becomes more attractive to buyers who need energy and have fewer choices. Russia has been selling oil to India, China, Turkey, Egypt, and a growing list of non-Western nations at volumes and at terms that bypass Western sanctions entirely. In the fiscal year since Western sanctions were imposed, Russia's energy revenues were higher, not lower, than the year before, because the price of the commodity went up faster than the volume went down. This conflict reinforces that dynamic. Disrupted Gulf supply means higher global energy prices. Higher global energy prices mean more revenue for every barrel Russia sells. And every new buyer Russia locks in with a long-term supply contract is a buyer that has implicitly decided that its energy security matters more to it than its relationship with the Western financial system. Russia's exposure is a conflict that escalates beyond manageable disruption. A genuine regional catastrophe that crashes global demand, hurts even its non-Western customers, and forces a level of instability that even insulated economies cannot absorb. For ordinary Russian families, the calculation their government is making is deeply uncomfortable. A world in enough crisis to drive up energy prices and drive nations toward Russian supply is, for now, a world in which Russia survives. Now let us turn to the actor that is most caught in the middle with the least strategic flexibility. On the surface, Europe looks unified. Its statements align with Washington. Its sanctions packages are coordinated. Its public messaging presents a coherent Western bloc. But underneath that surface, Europe is in the most exposed strategic position of any major Western actor in this conflict. And the exposure is financial, political, and increasingly demographic. Europe imports the large majority of its energy. After the Ukraine conflict pushed it to reduce Russian supply, it scrambled toward Gulf alternatives, American liquefied natural gas, and a patchwork of emergency arrangements that are expensive, fragile, and now directly vulnerable to the disruption this war is causing. German industrial output, the engine of the European economy, runs on energy. French households heat their homes on energy. Southern European tourism and agriculture depend on the affordable transport that energy prices directly control. The political consequences are already visible and growing. Across Germany, France, Italy, Hungary, and the Netherlands, political movements that question the costs of Western foreign policy commitments are gaining ground, not because voters have become ideologically extreme, but because voters are cold, financially squeezed, and unconvinced that the sacrifices being asked of them are producing results they can see or feel. The gap between what European governments say about this conflict and what European households experience because of it is growing. And that gap is politically explosive. For ordinary European families, this war is not arriving as a geopolitical story, it is arriving as an energy bill, a mortgage payment that stretches further than before, and a growing, quiet anxiety that their governments are managing global commitments that their economies can no longer comfortably sustain. Now let us look at the part of the world where none of this is abstract at all. On the surface, the global south, sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia, and parts of Latin America appears to be a spectator. These nations do not have the aircraft carriers or the Security Council seats. They are not making the decisions. The camera rarely points at them, but underneath that surface, the global south is where the real human consequences of this conflict are arriving fastest, hardest, and with the least ability to absorb them. Across sub-Saharan Africa, food supply chains are linked to global fertilizer markets that are directly connected to Gulf energy. When Gulf energy is disrupted, fertilizer prices rise. When fertilizer prices rise, food production and subsistence farming economies falls, when food production falls in nations with no financial cushion to replace it. Through imports, families go hungry. The United Nations World Food Program has already issued warnings about supply disruptions affecting more than a dozen African nations as a direct consequence of this conflict. These are not projections. They are already happening. In Southeast Asia, Thailand and Vietnam are already experiencing fuel rationing. Workers cannot afford to fuel their motorbikes to reach their jobs. Factories are curtailing production because energy costs make full operation financially impossible. Airlines are canceling flights. These are nations that built their entire economic model on cheap energy manufacturing. And the cheap energy era is ending. Not gradually, but suddenly, right now. The bombs fall in the Middle East, but the hunger arrives in Africa. The job disappears in Vietnam. The family falls behind in Pakistan. That is emotional geography, and it is the part of this story that the mainstream coverage is almost entirely failing to tell. For the 2 billion ordinary people living across the global south, this conflict is not a geopolitical abstraction. It is the price of bread, the cost of fuel, the survival of a livelihood. And it is arriving with no warning and no safety net. So now let us zoom out and look at the biggest picture of all. Because what this war is really doing, the thing that gets almost no airtime, is not just disrupting supply chains and elevating energy prices, it is simultaneously destabilizing the 4 structural pillars that the post-World War II global order has rested on for 80 years. The first pillar is American military dominance as the guarantor of global trade routes. That dominance is real but increasingly costly to project. Every commitment made in this conflict stretches resources that are simultaneously needed elsewhere. The world is watching how far that guarantee extends and how much it costs. The second pillar is the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. The petrodollar system that gives the dollar its indispensable status is under quiet but accelerating pressure from nations building alternative payment infrastructure, from oil contracts being settled in non-dollar currencies, and from the signal that financial weaponization sends to every nation watching. Your access to the system is conditional, not permanent. The third pillar is the multilateral institutional framework. The United Nations, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, that was designed to manage global disputes through rules rather than raw power. That framework is largely paralyzed. The Security Council is deadlocked. The institutions built for a less polarized world are struggling to function in a world that has become deeply, structurally polarized. The fourth pillar is cheap, reliable energy from the Gulf as the fuel of global industrial growth. That pillar is the most visibly threatened of all. And here's the crucial insight that most people are completely missing. These 4 pillars are not failing independently, they are failing together, at the same time in a mutually reinforcing pattern. The military overextension makes the financial architecture harder to sustain. The financial architecture under pressure weakens institutional authority. The weakened institutions make energy security harder to negotiate. And the energy insecurity makes military commitments more expensive. It is a feedback loop, and this conflict is not the cause of it, but it is the accelerant. A new order is being built in the space that the old one is leaving. Not in press conferences or UN resolutions, but in pipeline agreements, currency swap lines, and supply chain redirections that will still be shaping your life. 20% years from now. The nations that understand this, that are building their position in the new order while the old one fractures, are the ones that will emerge from this era with more power, not less. The nations watching only the first war are accumulating consequences they do not yet see coming. I want to end with the most important story of this conflict that is receiving almost no mainstream attention. The story that will matter most, not in 6 months, but in 20 years. You might expect me to say that the story being missed is about military strategy or about humanitarian suffering. And the suffering is real, and it matters enormously. But actually, no. The most important ignored story is about who is watching this conflict most carefully and building the most from it. The nations positioned to gain most from this era are not the ones fighting. They are the mid-sized powers that are refusing deliberately and strategically to choose sides. India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa. These nations together represent more than 3 billion people, the majority of the world's population growth, and a disproportionate share of the world's future consumer demand and natural resources, and every single one of them is pursuing what strategists call strategic autonomy. The deliberate refusal to be locked into either bloc combined with the active cultivation of relationships with both. They are accepting Western investment while buying Russian energy. They are sitting in BRICS summits while maintaining IMF relationships. They are negotiating infrastructure deals with China while selling commodities to Europe. They are extracting the maximum value from both sides of a divided world rather than being constrained by the logic of either. Think of it this way. In a chess match between two grandmasters who are utterly focused on defeating each other, neither player is paying sufficient attention to the board's edges. The mid-sized powers are occupying those edges, quietly, patiently, accumulating strength while the grandmasters exhaust themselves in the center. The nations that emerge from this conflict in the strongest long-term position will not be the ones that won the military contest. They will be the ones that used this period of great power preoccupation to build alliances, secure resources, develop their own industrial capacity, and expand their options. That is not passivity. That is the most sophisticated foreign policy of the 21st century. And the mainstream media, which is trained to cover the explosions, is almost entirely missing it. So let us just recap what we covered today. America, despite projecting military dominance, is fighting this conflict, while the petrodollar system that sustains its $39 trillion debt is under quiet, accelerating pressure. The first war looks strong. The second war is more complicated. China is not a bystander. It is running a patient, precisely calibrated second war strategy, reducing its Gulf energy dependency, building alternative financial infrastructure, and letting American foreign policy drive nations toward the alternatives. China has spent a decade constructing. Russia is the clearest short-term beneficiary. Disrupted Gulf supply means higher global energy prices, more revenue for every barrel Russia sells, and more nations locking in long-term supply relationships that bypass Western financial pressure. Europe is paying the bill it did not order. High energy costs are producing political fractures across the continent as the gap between what governments say and what households experience grows to a politically unsustainable size. The global south is absorbing the real human cost in food prices, fuel rationing, canceled flights, lost jobs, and in the worst cases, hunger. While the nations responsible for the disruption are barely discussing their impact on the world's most vulnerable populations, all four structural pillars of the post-1945 global order, American military reach, dollar dominance, multilateral institutions, and cheap Gulf energy, are being stressed simultaneously. They are not failing independently, they are failing together in a self-reinforcing pattern that this conflict is accelerating. And the most important actors in this entire drama are the 3 billion people living in mid-sized nations that are refusing to choose sides, building strategic autonomy, and positioning themselves as the indispensable partners of a fractured world. Everyone is watching the war. But the real story is what is being built in its shadow. And the nations and the people that understand that are the ones who will write the next chapter. And tell me in the comments, which country do you think is playing the second war most intelligently right now? China with its long-term financial strategy, or the mid-sized powers like India and Turkey with their strategic autonomy? There is no wrong answer here. I read every comment. I will see you next time.